define, sometimes I'm going to abbreviate that to COP as negative CF0. Basically, the cash flow in year one is CF0, year zero, CF0. Almost always that cash flow is negative. Nobody actually gives you money to put a project in place that I know of. And we have future cash flows for n years. Basically, n is uh, life length of project. Basically, after n years, you don't expect anything from the project. And these cash flows are CF1 through CFN. And we have an R that is cost of capital. It's the discount rate. We use things like cost of capital, required rate of return, hurdle rates, discount rates kind of interchangeably. So if you hear me use these terms, they're all referring to the same thing. And definition of MPV is simple enough. CF0, which is negative of the cost of capital, plus first year cash flow, but discounted. So if I'm going to get $110 next year and my interest rate is 10%, in present value terms, that's the same thing as $100. Come on. I'm going to do the same thing to cash flow in year two, but I'm going to discount that twice. Basically, discounting it once brings it to year one values, and doing it again brings it to year zero values. Of course, we're going to continue until we reach the last one. Simple enough. I mean, you can think of these as present value of the first cash flow, present value of the second cash flow. Even this, since these are all in present value terms, I can add them up. It's like, if you have $20, 20 euros, 20 pounds, you can add them directly, right? First, you have to convert them to the same currency. Let's make them 100. Currently, €1 is about $117. So 100 euro is $117. 1 pound is 135. So 100 pounds is equal to $135. So if you add them up, you're going to get $352. Okay. But you have to express them in the same currency. In that sense, present value kind of acts like that. And making this calculation is not too complicated, but we're going to go ahead and actually build a template. Of course, we have inputs, right? Cost of capital is one of them. Cost of project is another. Life of project is another. I'm going to add one more input before I go into future cash flows. I'm going to call this significance. Normally, the NPV rule says accept the project if net present value is positive, but life is never that clear cut. First of all the inputs that goes into these calculations are estimates or projections, which means in addition to regular riskiness, there is the statistical margin of error. So when I do this kind of work in practice, I kind of want to define a gray area. You know, if it is positive but significant enough positive, I'm going to say go ahead and accept it. Sometimes it's negative, but it's not too bad. I don't want to directly reject the project. So in that gray area, I'm going to basically say, why don't we think about this a little bit more? Maybe go back to inputs, or there are certain other things that we're going to cover in a little bit later chapters. Maybe in the future, for example, let's say you estimate that you can sell $100 million worth of your new product next year or all years. But this is an estimate. And next year comes along, you put the project on, suddenly you realize that you overestimated the demand for it because it's based on marketing survey, yada, yada, yada. And, you know, economies also change. It doesn't mean you're stuck with the project. You can say, okay, things are a lot worse than we thought it would be. If they were 100, this project would have made money. But if they're 70, we're sure to lose money. So how about we actually get out, abandon the project? Well, sometimes abandoning the project is actually better than continuing with the project. If that's the case, that option to abandon has additional value. That means even some negative NPV projects may have value. Well, that's why I want to create that. What that number should be, well, it varies. But for now, those are my inputs. As you know, I make my inputs to have a Welsh green background. By the way, that shade of green is not an accident. If you go to Wales, especially North Wales, the mountains are of that color. I mean, I shouldn't call them mountains technically, because relatively speaking, they're hills. They're similar to Appalachians in height. They're not like the Blue Ridge Mountains. Well, my cost of capital is going to have a percent format. I'm going to add 2 digits. Cost of project is dollar. Life of the project is just an integer. So I'll make this. And my significance is going to be a percent as well. So I have 1250, maybe $50,000. I'm going to get cash flow for 5 years. And my significance is 10%. Basically, the way I use that, if the NPV is within plus or minus 10% of the cost of project, I'm going to be saying, let's think about this a little bit more before we make a decision. Outside that, we're going to make our decision. Later on, using certain criteria, I'm going to have a little bit more inputs. So let's put our years, 0, 1. I'm going to make this general enough up to 120 periods. It doesn't mean you have to use all of them. I call it this a template. And every time number of years change, I don't want you to add stuff. As you know, we're civilized people, so I'm not going to write all those numbers from 1 to 120 by hand. If you have a pattern for a pair of cells, in this case, pattern is it increases by 1. Come to the lower right-hand corner of that selection. You can see the cursor change into a thin black cross. Click, grab, but don't let go. As you drag, there's a little white rectangle there. Unfortunately, I can't zoom on that. It tells you where you would stop. If I let this go, it would stop at 7. Well, I want to do this under 120. I'm too fast for my. Come on. Boom, it automatically replicates it. Go back up. I'm going to have my cash flow. Well, the first one is easy, negative of the cost of project by definition, right? Since that's a formula, I'm going to tell myself that's a red light. Don't touch that. So that's not an input cell. Now I have all these inputs. In this specific case, the first 5 are the inputs. So I'm going to do 2 things over there. One, I'm going to tell myself as the user, or if you are the user, I'm going to give you an indication that which cells you need to put the numbers in. As you know, I put a green background on this. So I want to put a green background on the first 5, but I'm going to leave the rest unchanged. So, but if I change the project life to 7, now I want the first 7 to have a green background, the rest unchanged. Well, how do I do that? We're going to use something called conditional formatting. So we're going to determine what format to apply based on value of a formula. Before I do that,